to the back half
Let's do it.
of this chapter. So last week talking about Brave Danny Flint, right? And the theories surrounding her, but there's a ton more in this chapter that I didn't want to leave up. And I'm gonna kind of read a big block here. So this is just a little bit here when Mira starts climbing, and there's just so much to break down here. So it's talking about I want to stand on top with Mira, Bran thought. I want to stand on top and see. But he was a broken boy with useless legs, so all he could do was watch from below as Mira went up in his stead. She wasn't really climbing the way he used to climb. She was only walking up some steps that the Night's Watch had hewn hundreds and thousands of years ago. He remembered Maester Lewin saying the Night Fort was the only castle where the steps had been cut from the ice of the wall itself, or maybe it had been Uncle Benjen. The newer castles had wooden steps or stone ones or long ramps of earth and gravel. Ice is too treacherous. It was his uncle who told him that. He said that was the outer surface of the wall wept icy tears sometimes through the core, and though the core inside stayed as frozen hard as rock. The steps must have melted and refrozen 1,000 times since the last Black brothers left the castle, and every time they did, they shrunk a little and got smoother and rounder and more treacherous and smaller. It's almost like the wall was swallowing them back into itself. Mira Reed was very sure-footed, but even so, she was going slowly, moving from nub to nub. In two places where the steps were hardly there at all, she got down on all fours. It will be worse when she comes down, Bran thought, watching. Even so, he wished it was him up there. When she reached the top, crawling up the icy knobs that were all that remained of the highest steps, Mira vanished from his sight. When will she come down? Bran asked Jojen. When she is ready. She will want to have a good look at the wall and what's beyond. We should do the same down here. Hodor, said Hodor doubtfully. We must find something, Jojen said, or something might find us. Bran couldn't say it, though. He did not want Jojen to think he was craven. So
lots going on right there.
Yeah, there's a ton that's going on there, because one, George is making comparisons to like the magic of the wall and how maybe it's diminishing over time, but also how it is still there and it is still powerful. And you also have Bran looking at Mira climbing and wishing he could do that, but he's now on his own journey where he is down here and he still needs to look for something.
Yeah.
And how he wants to see the height of the world, but he's actually on his way to go be able to do that, but he's going to be able to do it through the eyes of a weirwood, which they go into later, not from climbing towers as a man. He'll actually be even more powerful by being able to go through ravens and everything. It's like you could almost sum up Bran's entire journey in this one, 2 paragraphs here.
Yeah, it's really good, right? And there's the big thing about, steps being made of the ice. Well, okay, well, the ice from the wall seems to have magical properties to it, which is kind of interesting. But we're also reminded of what happened to Bran at the beginning of the series by this, right? Like he climbed and he fell, but he still wants to climb. And that's kind of an admirable trait in a fantasy protagonist, or really any protagonist of any story, is that someone who wants to get up and do it again. That's kind of the mentality I think all of us wish we had. And even though Bran is confined to a wheelchair currently, he is still thinking, I would love to be up there, which I think is relatable in some regard. I mean, obviously, I'm not in a wheelchair, but you know what I'm saying. When you get knocked down, you get back up.
Right. Yeah. And it kind of continues on a little bit here, because then we kind of get a big lore dump here, and this is gonna be another big section. I'll read this as well. So there were a lot of dark doors in the Night Fort and a lot of rats. Bran could hear them scurrying through the vaults and cellars and the maze of pitch black tunnels that connected them. Jojen wanted to go poking around down there, but Hodor said Hodor to that, and Bran said no. There were worse things than rats down in the dark beneath the Night Fort. This seems an old place, Jojen said as they walked down a gallery where the sunlight fell into dusty shafts through empty windows. Twice as old as Castle Black, Bran said, remembering. It was the first castle on the wall and the largest, but it had also been the first abandoned, all the way back in the time of the old king. Even then, it had been 3/4 empty and too costly to maintain. Good Queen Alicent had suggested that the Watch replace it with smaller, newer castles at a spot only 7 miles east, where the wall curved along the shore of a beautiful green lake. Deep Lake had been paid for by the Queen's jewels and built by the men the old king had sent north, and the Black Brothers had abandoned the night fort to the rats. That was 2 centuries past, though. Now Deep Lake stood as empty as the castle it had been replaced, and then the night fort. There are ghosts here, Bran said. Hodor heard all of the stories before, but Jojen might not have. Old ghosts from the old king. Even before Aegon the Dragon, 79 deserters who went south to be outlaws. One was Lord Roswell's youngest son, so when they reached the Barrowlands, they sought shelter at his castle, but Lord Roswell took them captive and returned them to the night fort. The Lord Commander had holes hewn in the top of the wall, and he put the deserters in them and sealed them up alive in the ice. They have spears and horns, and they all face north. The 79 Sentinels, they're called. They left their post in life, so in death their watch goes on forever.
So metal.
So ridiculous.
So cool.
So cool. Years later, when Lord Ryswell was old and dying, he had himself carried to the night fort so he could take the Black and stand beside his son. He sent him back to the wall for honor's sake, but he loved him still, so he came to share his watch.
Dude, like that's the stuff I love about this series. Like that is just such a, some people would say, oh, we didn't need to know that, but there's a little bit here. Okay. And what I was thinking about is like they're freezing human beings in the wall, right? So we always talk about blood magic. But does blood require like literal blood being spilled, or is it something about the human being?
Is it like just killing somebody?
Right. Like the spirit of someone or the soul of someone being trapped or used, or their essence or whatever it might be. Is there a chance that the reason why the wall is magical is because there have been other bodies put into the wall? Like, is that something that we could consider here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe that's why some people think there is actually a dragon in the wall. Could these will these things bust out of the wall at some point?
Imagine?
I mean, like when we see the crypts of Winterfell, and that was like, ooh, that was scary because they're down there, and then all the skeletons and stuff come out. Like maybe we'll get something like that, but it's going to be the wall, and all these creatures and other things come in. And maybe maybe there are dragons, and like there is like an ice dragon embedded in the wall, and that's what created it, right?
Could you imagine?
Yeah, and maybe that's where Dan and Dave got the idea for pulling the dragon out of the lake.
Could be. I mean, certainly could be. I imagine that budget was a little bit cheaper than doing the entire wall, spawning dragon or dragons, maybe.
Right.
But yeah, dude, I think that this is like one of the cooler lore dumps in a Bran chapter, which, I always just question why people don't like Bran chapters. I think this stuff is
amazing.
Like the best. I think it's the best.
Yeah. Oh, they're amazing. And then it continues on too. And then I'll pull down a little bit here. So Mira comes back, right? And he says, "What did you see?" Her brother Jojen asks her. "I saw the haunted forest," she said in a wistful tone. "Hills rising wild as far as the eye can see, covered with trees that no axe has ever touched. I saw the sunlight glinting off a lake and clouds sweeping in from the west. I saw patches of old snow and icicles long as pikes. I even saw an eagle circling. I think he saw me too. I waved at him," which, that part is like, that's actually not what you should have done. Right. Because as the reader know, like, of course, nothing really ever happens with that. But, we know that that's actually, the wildlings and Oral on the other side coming down, and they probably saw him. But I just love every description we get, especially if everything just north of the wall, right? Like the haunted forest and like icicles long as pikes, like they can see these things, and it does feel magical. But maybe it's just that, is it actually magical up there, or is it just the world, and the world below the wall has had diminished magic? Because there's still weirwoods everywhere, and those are magical.
Yeah, maybe they removed some of the magic from the world whenever they started to, modernize Westeros, at least for that age. I mean, that's certainly possible. But it's also just a sense of wonder of going somewhere that you've never been. Or she's talking about like, axes have never graced these trees. Like, isn't there is something magical about going out into nature and seeing these places that humans have not, for lack of a better word, contaminated. Whenever I was in like deep forest in Ireland, I felt that. Like it almost does. Some people will describe it as almost like a spiritual experience, but for me, it feels magical. It's
Right.
like you know, has anyone ever stood at this exact spot? Like that kind of thing. And we are on an adventure with this group, and we're seeing the next level that they're about to go to, right? Like they're going to go beyond the wall. We're talking about a place where maybe no one else has walked. Like those type of things, I think lend itself to a bit of like grand epic adventure feel for Bran and in the crew.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, I agree, because we talked about this in last week's chapter, but that's really what last week when we did part 1 of this. But that's really what this chapter is, and I love that George is giving us the lore dump here as well,
Yeah.
because this chapter ultimately is like Bran. We're going to be going through, like, this is kind of his final goodbye to just being Bran,
Mm-hmm.
and now we're about to enter him really becoming the three-eyed crow.
Yeah. This is kind of it. And leaving a world that feels very familiar for one that has been, for all intents and purposes, untreaded. I'm sure the wildlings have been all over it, but yeah,
Yeah.
for someone like him, definitely uncharted territory.
Yeah. Okay. So it continues on a little bit more here, and this is where we get our lore dump of the Night King, the Night's King, I should
Yeah.
say. Right. The tale of the Night's King. He'd been the 13th man to lead the Night's Watch. This is Old Nan telling Bran, and Bran is remembering it. She said, "A warrior who knew no fear, and that was the fault in him. All men must know fear. A woman was his downfall. A woman glimpsed from atop the wall with skin as white as the moon and eyes like blue stars. Fearing nothing, he chased her and caught her and loved her, though her skin was as cold as ice. And when he gave her his seed, to her give his soul as well. He brought her back to the Nightfort and proclaimed her a queen and himself her king. And with strange sorceries, he bound his sword brothers to his will. For 13 years, they had ruled, Night's king and his corpse queen, till finally the Starks, the Winterfell and Joramun and the wildlings had joined to free the witch from bondage." And we kind of know the rest of this. Old Nan says, some say he was a Bolton, some say he was a Magnar out of Skagos, some say Umber, Flint, which you also hear about brave Danny Flint at the beginning here, right? And so here Flint comes back, or Nori. Some would have you think he was a Woodfoot from those who ruled Bear Island before the Iron Men came. He never was. He was a Stark, the brother of the man who brought him down. She always pinched Bran on the nose. Then would he ever forget it? He was a Stark of Winterfell, and who can say? Mayhaps, his name was Brandon. Mayhaps he slept in this very bed in this same room. And then Bran says, no, he walked this castle where we'll sleep tonight.
Which the first thing that pops in my mind, because I'm a crazy theorist in this in this series, is, are all Brandon's Bran? That's what
Correct.
a lot of people ask, and it's like, so are we actually hearing about a story that is about Bran from the future interacting with the past, and who would be the corpse queen? I also just immediately think, a Stark being with someone maybe from up north. Obviously, we have Ygritte, right? But there's also the idea of Val. Like we've talked about Val a lot, and the huge question mark in the books that is nowhere near in the show. I mean, it's completely left out. So, is there a chance that like Jon Snow and Val might be some sort of um, parallel example of the Night's King and the Corpse Bride?
Yeah. Agreed. And I think that's something, or Danny, right? Which is why people talk about, like, so it's kind of interesting because, we talk about the differences of like Azor Ahai versus Nissa and all of these things. And, clearly the way the show kind of portrayed it, we kind of have to remove ourselves because that Night King does not exist
Right.
in the show. But Azor Ahai did defeat, we believe, the White Walkers and push them back, and he did so with his flaming sword, which he had to kill White Walker, essentially, right? He had to stab his lover through the chest, and that's what ignited it, essentially. And people thought that's what's going to happen with John and Danny, is that she would be the sacrifice. But here it's kind of interesting because you almost potentially have the opposite, where maybe like that's something I don't think people really theorize a lot about, is Nissa, and like, okay, well, let's say she was a White Walker, just for example, because clearly there's something weird with her,
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, they talk about her skin could just be pale because she could be a wildling or a free folk, right? And you live in an area in which, you have more pale skin. It doesn't have, it could be, because a lot of the people in the Night's Watch, maybe I don't know, maybe they're from Dorne and all this other stuff. So they view her skin as more pale because they're from all over the seven kingdoms. So you
Sh
have,
Yeah, and she could also just be albino too. I mean, a lot of the legends in Westeros are usually just exaggerated from traits about the person that are kind of eccentric. So, like Roose Bolt being a vampire is like a really fun theory.
your cat is going
Did you just
nuts.
see that?
Your cat is going
He
nuts.
never jumps up there. Like, what are we doing? He's knocking stuff over. He just knocked over my Lord of the Rings action figures. What are we doing back there, dude? Anyways,
That's
sorry.
that's great.
He's being terrible today.
But let's for a second assume that Nissa is um let's assume or I guess I shouldn't say Nissa, the corpse queen, because there's actually two different characters. Sorry. Um but let's for a second assume that the corpse queen is a White Walker. Well, that means that humans and White Walkers can get together, because remember, we've talked about how White Walkers are totally different in the books than they are in the show.
Yeah, we think that they're most likely not just like mindless zombies, but maybe just a different race or some offshoot of human evolution up there. I mean, the Children of the Forest were up there as well. So, like, it stands. I think there's some logic to say that there could be other mysterious races up there, and the White Walkers might just simply be that. I don't know.
Right. Also, how does he get her into the castle?
It's a good
If she
question.
were if she were actually a White Walker, which some people believe that she is, right? Because then that causes a whole bunch of questions to be raised. Like, I thought the White Walkers couldn't go beyond the wall. If you open the gate, can they walk through? Can they walk through because it's a weirwood gate? I
I
mean,
mean,
there's a
dude,
lot.
there's so
There's
much that we could go into. Like, we could say that let's just have fun with it, right? Let's just say that she is actually someone very prominent within the White Walker culture, and then she
Mhm,
falls in love with a mortal man, and that causes them to want to march and come get her, kind of like Lyanna, actually, like a
right.
false pretense, right? We think that
Mhm,
Rhaegar's captured her, but she's actually in love. What if we had that exact same thing, which caused the White Walkers to come south, and maybe they are marching once again? Man,
right.
I don't really know. This is
Well,
me going crazy
it
with
was
this.
no. Actually, what's interesting is that is what you're talking about. Actually, in a way, happens in this chapter, because the end of this chapter is when he runs into Bran, or so he runs into Sam and Gilly and the
Yeah,
baby.
yeah,
Right?
it's
And
true.
like,
Yeah,
remember, that was a big theory in season 8. Everybody's like, that baby's got to be important. Now, in the books, remember, it's different.
way more
And
important than the books, though.
there's still something big, I think, going to happen with those babies, because the babies get swapped,
Yeah,
right?
the swap matters for
The,
sure.
the swap definitely matters. But remember, that's one of the things they thought, because we get that scene in the show, which could still
Mhm.
be the case in the book, because clearly Craster is giving them away. We just don't know what happens to them in the books.
Yeah, we have no
Right.
idea.
I that's one of the things where the show, maybe that's something George gave him. That's something we find out later, is like, oh no, the White Walkers are taking those babies from Crasher. Because are they eating them? You know what I mean? I don't think they are. Like, he's offering them up, and what's happening to them.
Man, it's so interesting to think about like how many different ways that this could go.
Yeah,
Like,
this chapter is like huge, because it could go in like a million different
I
directions.
also always think about like Tad Williams' series and Ostenard, and which was a huge inspiration for George. And like, there's definitely some of like what I'm postulating, just some of that over there in Ostenard world. I'm like, would he pull that kind of influence from Tad Williams? Maybe it's possible. I like almost everything we're talking about. I don't know how likely all of it is, but it's fun to theorize about because it's wide open, I
Right.
think.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to take in this is Cold Hands,
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
they're talking, is there, and they're talking about as well, right? He said, Jojen frowned. This Cold Hands, that wasn't his true name, said Gilly. We only called him that, Sam and me. His hands were as cold as ice, but he saved us from the dead men, him and his ravens, and he brought us here on his elk, Bran said, wonderstruck. His ravens, said Jojen. That's interesting. Bran and Mira both are like, his elk, and his ravens, said Jojen, and Hodor says Hodor. right? Was he green? Bran wanted to know. Did he have antlers? Because he's thinking, oh, it's like a green man. Like
Yeah.
that's the story. That's the story he goes to, which we saw that in House of the Dragon. I hope they explore that more too. I mean,
Would be cool, wouldn't it?
it's crazy. He wasn't a green man. He wore blacks like a brother of the Watch, but he was pale as a white. His hands so cold that at first I was afraid. So maybe that's something else we should consider. Is actually like the Night's King and this woman. What's to say that she isn't whatever Cold Hands is?
Yeah, some sort of like in between.
Right, and some sort of agent of whoever, because maybe the three-eyed crow is so ridiculous because we talked about how well it transfers from Blood Raven to Bran, and we've always said that means there are probably more people that have that mantle throughout history as well.
Yes.
So if Cold Hands can be like created from the three-eyed crow / children of the forest, then how do we know that the Corpse Queen wasn't that? Because clearly she goes, in theory, beyond the wall, or, because she goes into the Night Fort and is there for 13 years as this queen to the Night's King and influences him. So that ties into all these theories of like, was the three-eyed crow good or bad? Or what if it is Bran? Yeah, I mean, Bran influencing Bran in the past. I mean, it's this chapter is like unhinged with how many theories you could go.
You could have a lot of
we
fun.
could do a part 3 and part 4 to this because there's just so much to go into it.
And a lot of hypotheticals too that we could play with. Do you think there's any correlation, maybe not correlation, but there's kind of like a through line between the Night's King and the Corpse Queen for Stannis and Melisandre as well? Like, he's at the wall now with this witch, and they say that he's following her, and it just feels very similar in some ways. I don't think it's a 1-for-1 by any means. It might not even be, George might not even be trying to draw those parallels, but it does feel somewhat similar.
Right. Well, it's also the fire aspect to it as well.
Yeah.
And maybe the wall is pushing back, because the wall clearly pushed back on the dragon from flying over, whether it got scared or who knows. It was Allison who got scared and the dragon feared it. We don't know. But I mean, I think maybe that is also part of the events that are actually going on with Melisandre and Stannis. Maybe it's like she wasn't meant to go there because like magically the realm of ice is like pushing back on her. I mean, it's insane. This is like as crazy as Bran 3 of a Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Which is why I love I don't know how people could not like the Bran chapters, because I mean it's wild. We talked about, I mean, we had to do a part 2.
For me, I think he includes the most fantastical elements and a lot more of like the mythological lore, and that's the stuff that I'm really attracted to. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who read A Song of Ice and Fire in spite of the fantasy genre, meaning that they like, I don't really like fantasy, but I like Game of Thrones, which has always somewhat annoyed me just a little bit. But I think that us being fantasy fans helps us appreciate Bran chapters because there's so much lore in them.
Hold on a second here.
Uh-oh.
I'm gonna drop. Just hear me out.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't make sense. Never mind. I was about to say, but it doesn't. No, I had to think about it for a second. But it says, "Cold Hands," said Bran impatiently. "The green men ride on elks." Old Nan used to say. "Sometimes they have antlers too." He wasn't a green man. He wore blacks, like a brother of the Watch, but he was pale as a white. Yeah, I was just thinking of that second. I'm sure people are like, is Cold Hands Howland Reed? No, I don't think you can go down that route.
Is Cold Hands Old Nan? Has Old Nan slept with Cold Hands? That's another question we should.
Yeah, I do like this line though. Immediately after, so the whites have blue eyes though they don't have tongues, or they've forgotten how to use them. The fat man turned to Jojen because it's Sam, right? But you're getting Sam from somebody else's perspective. Just that's a just great line.
The fat man is so rude.
That's how they view him.
That's brutal.
Yeah, it's just great. And then they talk about, why did you bring him through the Black Gate too? He can't. Why not? The wall is more than just ice and stone. He said there are spells woven into it, old ones and strong. He cannot pass beyond the wall. But clearly this Corpse Queen does. But again, that could all be a myth and legend, and we don't know. But so does that? We don't know. Is she some sort of Cold Hands like thing? Is she a white?
We would love to hear.
Is it just some woman? Maybe she's a sorcerer. Maybe she's like a Mira Mazder.
Could be. I mean, also we don't know like everything about north of the wall.
Hmm.
We really just don't know how that's operated through the years or the decades or the centuries. So who's to say that she isn't another type of like humanoid?
Yeah.
We can't be sure. If any of you listening have thoughts, I mean, we would love for you to email us at btkcast@gmail.com. Like we would absolutely love to hear some people chime in on this because me and Matt spitball back and forth. We get a little crazy, but there might be a whole different perspective
Yeah.
that we're not thinking
And we
about.
get a lot of comments on YouTube actually, and so I've got a bunch of them saved, and I want to dive into some of those because those reflect on a lot of our last few episodes.
Yeah.
So I think we'll do maybe just a Ravens episode, catching up on some of those because we do get a lot of comments on there. So okay, we'll close out here, and we'll just talk about these last little bit here about the door because it's just super cool. It was a white weirwood and there was a face on it. A glow came from the wood like milk and moonlight, so faint it scarcely seemed to touch anything beyond the door itself, not even Sam standing right before it. The face was old and pale, wrinkled and shrunken. It looks dead. Its mouth was closed, and in its eyes its cheeks were sunken, its brow withered, its chin sagging. If a man could live for 1,000 years and never die, but he just grew older, his face might come to look like that, which interesting about about the trees. Perhaps, maybe their faces did look different over many years ago. The door opens its eyes. They were white too and blind. Who are you? The door asks, and the well whispered, who, kind of like a raven, or a crow, as the crow kind of mimics. I am the sword in the darkness, Samwell Tarley said. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers. I am the shield that guards the realms of man. Oh, yeah. And I've taken down a White Walker. No big deal or anything, the fat man said. Okay. Which is how I read it. Then
I love
pass,
it.
the door said, its lips open wide and wider still, until nothing, all that remained but a great gaping mouth and a ring of wrinkles. Sam stepped aside and waved Jojen through ahead of him. Summer followed, sniffing as he went, and then it was Bran's turn. Hodor ducked, but not low enough. The door's upper lip brushed softly against the top of Bran's head, and a drop of water fell on him and ran slowly down his nose. It was strangely warm and salty as a tear, which we talked about last week too.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a magical moment, like genuinely magic, right?
Right. And it's,
Just supernatural.
we often look at the weirwood trees, and we think like, oh yeah, they're magical. Can they do this? Can they do that? But here, clearly, one can do a whole bunch of stuff. It can flat out talk to you.
It's wild, right? And we're also getting more north. As we go more north, we're going to see a lot more crazy things. And this is kind of like Bran walking through that portal into a truly straight up supernatural type world.
Right. So the real question is it the tree that's talking, or is it Bloodraven?
I don't know, bro. I mean, weirwoods in themselves, like we've kind of accepted the idea that they're a network and that you can peek through them and like they're almost like shells to be used and inhabited by Bloodraven, but I don't know, maybe not. Right. Like maybe they're stemming from people who were buried in that soil prior. I don't really know. But this being one of the most on the nose piece of magic in the series, I think is really, really important for this point in Bran's journey, considering what we will see from him later on and also in Dance with Dragons.
Yeah. So one last question here before we
Okay.
go. Let's say that we know that there's obviously weirwoods, and like you just said, maybe as you get further north, they become more powerful. Do you think that, let's just call it the prime weirwood, like the first one?
Oh.
Do you think it's above the wall, or do you think it's at the God's Eye?
Oh man.
Because I bet that tree could, like, if we find out that the tree that Bloodraven is at isn't just a weirwood tree, or perhaps a really powerful one, but is like the first.
Yeah. Like, where's the
Tree.
hub? Where's the motive?
Right.
I'll be honest. I'm just gonna be biased. I'm gonna say God's Eye.
Right. That's still kind of what I'm
I think it's
thinking.
cooler if it's the God's Eye.
Yeah, like there is something even more special about that.
Yeah, and obviously God's Eye's a wild place.
Right.
I mean,
But yeah, I mean that could be something too, and that would be like, okay, so that's like the hub of the network, and why maybe the Night King really wants to get in there and take it down.
possible. Very, very possible.
Crazy. Okay, well, I think that's it for us today. Yeah, this had to be a two-parter just because, man, there's just so much to talk about. But I think next time so the next chapter is a Daenerys chapter. It is Daenerys 5. But I think we will probably actually do a big Ravens episode next, just because I have a bunch and they are really good. Like for
Yeah, absolutely.
just some like huge YouTube comments we have.
Love the listener
And some of
interaction.
it is like, one of them is on we remember we did the prologue for the anniversary chapter. Great comment there. And we have another one on like Howland Reed, another one on Duncan Egg. So I want to definitely do like we'll do like a big Ravens episode next.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah. So, okay, guys. Well, with that, we will see you next time. And as always, remember that winter is coming.